This is an exciting one. I'll let Tejas sort of introduce Freddie. So Tejas is the co-founder and co-CEO of High Touch. They use data and AI to optimize marketing. And Freddie is the co-founder and a former COO of Okta, an amazing public company. I'll let Tejas explain why he has a plant with him.
Yeah, so I heard that the next group has like furniture and a couple ferns maybe. So we thought we have to bring a treat of our own for the crowd.
How's everyone doing today? You're going to have to do better than that. It's the afternoon. They didn't give us any coffee back there. How's everyone doing? Dude, I don't know. All right, we'll see.
All right. Do you want to intro yourself a little bit, Freddie?
Sure. Nice to see you all. I can't see anything up here, of course, with the lights, but it's nice to be here with you all. My name is Frederick Harris. I'm the Vice Chairman and former Chief Operating Officer, co-founder of a public enterprise software company called Okta. I'm an enterprise software entrepreneur, an investor. I love building companies. I love what you all are doing here. I know you're all going through some good times, bad times, tough times, and everything else. So we've got a couple of prepared questions, but I'm hoping the audience will have some good ones and that we can talk about some interesting things today. So,
all right. And do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself personally? I know Okta probably took over your whole life over the last 10 years, but
15, but who's counting? I was even tall. I know it's hard to believe. I was even taller and better looking before we started Okta, and it's not just these chairs. Yeah, I'm married. I have 3 amazing kids. I live here in the Bay Area, yeah, just happy to be here. So,
all right. So tell us a little bit about when you founded Okta with Todd. What was the kind of like aha moment that made you think, okay, I'm going to start a company? What was the initial thesis or hypothesis? It was in 2008, 2009. How was that?
So my background is in computer science. I got a computer science degree a long time ago. I think one of the previous panelists said she was one of the oldest people in the room. I think I might also qualify. I wrote enterprise software for a while. I joined a company called Salesforce.com in 2002, right next door when there was about 100 people there. And I was there for about 5 years. The company went public, and that's where I met Todd. And as enterprise software folks, we spent a lot of time previously in a client-server world and then in a kind of 3-tier architecture world. And Todd and I had a front row seat to Salesforce and going public. The company had $50 million of revenue when I joined. It was about $1 billion when I left. I think they're going to do $38 billion this year. So this was quite a while ago, but it seemed like a new thing. People may actually subscribe to enterprise software over the internet. And so the thesis for the company was, look, enterprise IT doesn't throw anything away. What they do is they buy new things and they glue them on the front. And so we thought that there would be a need for an integration layer for all this modern cloud architecture to plug into all the existing IT infrastructure that was there. And and that was kind of the thesis. We pivoted. We can talk about that. We almost died 10 times, like maybe some of you. So yeah, it was quite a ride.
And what did it take to eventually make you realize, all right, I'm going to start the company? And was there a specific moment? Was there a specific realization? Was it an itch, an entrepreneurial itch that you just had, or?
Yeah, I think like all the entrepreneurs in the room, you feel like you need to go build something. You want to found something important. You want to do something important. I spent a lot of time in enterprise infrastructure. I'd been pretty close to the early days at Salesforce, but I hadn't founded the company myself, obviously. And it seemed like there was going to be a big change, and we wanted to be part of that change. So the first thesis we had for the company was actually different than what we ended up doing. It was more about some system management software, and we went out and talked to 50 CIOs, VPs of IT, directors of, frankly, anyone who would answer the phone, and asked them about what we were doing, and they said, well, that's interesting, but really there's this other problem, and it's about users, and it's about access, and it's just starting. And that was kind of the genesis behind it. Obviously, when you're starting a company, there's 2 of us. Today, the company has about 6,000 employees. It's about $2.5 billion of revenue. There's about 20,000 enterprise customers. It's been a public company for 7 years. So you don't kind of foresee that. But I think that when you get attached to some of these trends early on, if it's something you really care a lot about, there's always going to be great ways to find a way to make a difference and build a foundational company there. So,
What did the original product like actually do? Like, what's like a material example of like what you imagined the original Okta to do?
Yeah, the original product did not do anything really very well. The first customer that I was, the sales guy, and so I closed the first 20 customers or whatever. The first customer signed a $400 PO for 25 seats for 3 months, and they were like, well, the product doesn't work. And I was like, yeah, but it'll work. And then 3 months went by and it kind of didn't work anyway. And I was like, you owe us $400. And they're like, well, it still doesn't work. But I'd learned that trick from Brian Halligan at HubSpot, who used to have, they started before we did in the mid 2000s, and he used to have like a credit card machine, like a swipe machine. And he would go over to customers and be like, okay, I need your credit card. And they're like, it doesn't work. And he's like, yeah, but it's going to work. And if you want to use it when it does work, I need your credit card now. And that was a pretty effective sales technique. In fact, on the back of that $400 invoice and a little pipeline, we raised our Series A. So there you go. Things haven't changed that much.
Wow. So it was a Series A.
Yeah, but these are different times. We should talk about that. So
yeah, how does fundraising compare?
Yeah, fundraising's pretty different now. For all of those of you who are able to raise financing, there's a lot more capital in the system. You'd be lucky to get like 10, 12 times forward 12 months on a valuation, and you actually needed a business model to prove that you could get there, which it seems like is a little bit different these days. But yeah, so we were Andreessen Horowitz's first investment ever in their first fund ever. And Ben Horowitz is still on my board to this day, 14 years later. So it's been entertaining.
So would you say the investment came first or the product market fit came first?
We raised a seed round, what you would all call pre-seed, which I don't know how that makes any sense. Like the seed is the thing that goes in the ground. So like, what's the pre-seed? Like the soil. So there was no soil. It was like seed. And by the way, there was no seed firms or funds. It was like you went and talked to your parents and, some dentists as we used to do. And so we raised $1 million on like a 2-page, glossy PDF. And I'd spent a little bit of time in venture capital when I was in business school, just enough to know that like entrepreneurs are terrible at promising and delivering. So what I did was I said, hey, we're going to put a really low bar, and that way we can achieve it faster than we say we will. And so Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz were part of that seed round, and we did exactly that. We said it's going to take us a year. We're going to do this. And then we went and saw them 6 months later and had signed that one customer and had a little pipeline and built a little product. And that was the beginning. We ended up raising our Series A from Andreessen Horowitz, and the rest is history. So. And
that was for the login Okta,
or that was for
the integration Okta?
Single sign-on product that basically you could single sign-on into Salesforce and Google. And I don't think the Google one worked really well. The Google APIs were not tremendous back then. So yeah, I didn't do much more than that. You could try and create users and delete them, but it may or may not work. I remember this. We used it all the time, and I'd be like,
it works today, though, right?
My user just got deleted. Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes. Cool. So when you started Okta, you had a different thesis for the company. You went out and talked to a bunch of customers, and things changed, right? You got some feedback. You heard that this is a big opportunity. Was it super clear that the single sign-on login stuff is what you should pivot to, or how did you parse these calls?
Yeah, that was clear. What was harder was to do was to actually find the right product market fit. The problem with media, and I empathize and sympathize with all the founders in the room because media is very barbell. They're going to tell two kinds of stories. Either the story of Jeff Bezos, who's building rockets and going to the moon and whatever, or the stories of everyone lost $1 billion and they went to jail. But they don't talk about what happens most days to most entrepreneurs, which is you get up really early and you go to work for a long time, and then you try and build the company, and you do the same thing the next day, usually 7 days a week. And so we went through that, and all good companies, by the way, have almost died 10 times. And we almost did, a bunch of times. And I think you just have to have, grit and perseverance and resilience. And we had times where it's the forecast looked like that, but the actuals went like that. And people were like, we're going to quit. and you might not be able to raise another round of financing. Our Series B, we went through the Series B valley of death, where it's like, okay, on the A you can sell on a promise, on a B you have some early traction, but on a C you need to be able to drop like, a gas bag on it and have it just blow up and the whole thing take off. And like we were not there. And so through the Series B, like things got really tough. Very contentious with investors. I got thrown out of 2 board meetings in a row. People are like, you got thrown out of the same board meeting twice? I'm like, no. 2 board meetings, I got thrown out of both of them. Just because things were not going well. And so we were having arguments, and I thought I knew better, and the investors were like, you don't know anything. And you're like, well, I'm building the company. And I remember going home and telling my now wife, who, we were married at the time, but she's a doctor, so she was in resident doing like night call, which is like when you work only at nights. So it's like a waste of a month. I mean, you don't see him for like a month. And I remember coming home being like, she's like, how'd work go today? I was like, I didn't go that well. She's like, well, what happened? It's like, well, I kind of got thrown out of the board meeting again. She's like, okay, well, are they going to fire you? I was like, yeah, I guess, I might get fired from my own company. She's like, okay, well, can you get another job? And I was like, whoa. Like, where's the support? Where's the love? Like, what do you mean, can I get another job? Like, you're the doctor. Like, what? And she's like, okay, I got to go to bed now. And I'm like, what? So, yeah, no. It was fun times. It was fun times.
What was the biggest learning from that, like, Series B to Series C stage where,
Yeah, actually, a really good one, which was, I remember Ben and Anil Bushri, who is the CEO of Workday, who was a partner at Greylock at the time, and they sat us both down, me and Todd, and they're like, hey, here's the problem. Who's the head of sales? I was like, well, it's me. And they're like, yeah, but you're also the CFO and the general counsel and all these other things. And who's the head of engineering? Todd was like, well, that's me. They're like, yeah, well, the problem is you're also the CEO and all these other things, so what you guys need to do is get a dedicated head of engineering who is not you and a dedicated head of sales who is not you either. And people who actually will know how to build that engine the way it needs to be built next. And I was like, well, it's insulting, but you're like, I don't know, we might run out of money, which would be even more insulting. So, okay. And that was actually a big turning point, was realizing that it was the first time I realized that the way you succeed as a scaling entrepreneur is actually to hire people who are better than you are at all these other critical jobs. And then I actually spent like the next 10 years trying to hire the best people I could and like get out of all my jobs. And I was like, if I could, there's always plenty of stuff to do, so that's not a problem. But it's like, if I can find someone who is the best in the world at, we hired an amazing CFO, we hired an amazing general counsel, we hired an amazing head of people, all these people where you're like, wow, they're doing the job 10 times better than I did. And now I can focus on these other things because there's always more things to do. That was a big insight. And in late 2011, early 2012, we finally hit a quarter, which was a big deal. And we released a bunch of features, and we had just brought on the first head of sales and the first head of engineering who were not the founders. And that was a big aha moment, and something I always remembered. It was like, basically my job as a founder is to hire, attract, retain, develop amazing leaders, give them everything they need, block down all the barriers, and then get out of the way. And the more you can do that, the better off you'll be. And plenty of times, I'm an angel investor in about 100 private enterprise software companies now. I spend a lot of time with amazing people like Tejas when he answered my phone call, which isn't often, but that's okay. And the number one thing is like they become bottlenecks, and they become bottlenecks because like the growth of either the company or the function or whatever is limited by their capacity, both in terms of like what they can actually do, but also how much time they have, both of which are limited and both of which are constrained. And if you're doing well, are going to get more limited and more constrained.
At what point do you think your job as a founder pivots, right? From the doing everything phase to hiring is one of the most important top tasks. A lot of people in the audience are probably in the earlier stages of the companies with the Soil Summit we're at.
The Soil Summit, that's right. Soil and seed, just to be clear. You do everything for a long time. You still have to lead by example. It doesn't matter. Like even when you have thousands of employees, you can't ask anyone to do something you wouldn't be willing to do yourself. And so you can't ask someone to get on a flight and fly around the world to do a deal if you're not willing to do that yourself. And you have to pick and choose your spots, of course, but leadership, I mean, that's what leadership is about. So yeah, for sure, we did everything. And when you realize, like, assuming you have capital, which is like less of a constraint today than it has been, I'm sure there's some people in the audience being like, that's screwed up because I can't raise any money. I get it, okay. But in general, there's more capital in the system today. And so if you find yourself being like, hey, I'm overloaded in this one functional area, like customer support, but I don't have the time to write the job spec to hire that person, that's exactly when you need to stop and write the job spec, because you're probably like 3 months too late already. And I found myself in that position time and time again. And then slowly you get like, you start to see the patterns and be like, ooh, time out. I think in like 2 months I'm gonna need this, so let's go start looking for it now. But that's a big one, is like, if you don't think you have time to write the job spec, that's exactly what you need to be doing tomorrow.
Biggest hiring mistakes at the early stage and at the late stage?
Oh man, we made all the hiring mistakes.
Or tips?
I don't think we have enough time. Yeah. I don't know. What did he said? What? Yeah, 20-point checklist. Like, I don't know. That sounds pretty extreme. I don't think I had any 20-point checklists. You know, one thing is like, you're gonna hire a bunch of people where you don't know what great looks like. Okay. So, for example, you're trying to hire your first head of enterprise sales. Okay, you know what even a really bad head of enterprise sales is good at? Selling themselves. And you're not gonna know the difference. And so getting people who do know what that looks like, whether they're investors or advisors or friends of yours, or like, you know, cold calling people on LinkedIn or whatever, and saying, hey, when I get to, first of all, there's two things you should do. First of all, the job spec, okay? You should look at that and read it carefully and like design it with someone who knows what you're looking for. Because there's 5 different kinds or 10 different kinds of enterprise go-to-market models. And like, they're not all the same. And so people will be like, oh, I hired this guy because they're a gal because she came from so-and-so. You're like, that's a completely different business model than your business model. And they're like, shit. And you're like, yeah, shit, because that's an 18-month mistake, right? 6 months to fire the person, 6 months to recruit the new person, 6 months to get them up and ramped, at which point, like, your money's gone. So, I would say, like, be very careful on, like, how you're selecting leaders, and then get someone who knows what great looks like to help you interview these people. The other thing I would just say is, like, remember that your network is great, but also you should be recruiting all the time. I mean, none of you have heavy machinery or factories, which means that 70 cents of every dollar you spend goes on how you hire, attract, retain, develop, and grow the best people in the world. People are your number one cost. So if you're not spending 1 to 2 hours every day, calendared in the morning on your calendar, recruiting, I think that's a mistake. And you'd have to make the argument to me on why you're not doing that, because that's like the most important thing you should be doing at all times. If you have, as soon as you have 4 employees, I would hire an in-house recruiter. Assuming that your plan has you hiring 5 or 10 more people this year, it's a no-brainer. Because, you're like, I'm hiring an outsourced recruiter. Yeah, and they're working for 10 other people, and the squeaky wheel is going to get the grease, and that person is going to have tried to place someone 7 different places and got rejected, and then you're the 8th, but you don't know that. And they don't know the story like you do, and they don't know how things are moving. So, like, our 4th hire was an in-house recruiter, and like that was one of the smartest things we ever did. I give credit to that one, goes to my co-founder, who was like, absolutely. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. And he was totally right.
So these tips are really helpful once you've established a product market fit. But you all went through a pivot.
Even at 4 people, we did not have product market fit. No.
So what tips do you have
the product
on the
didn't work,
journey?
right? You guys all got that, right? Okay.
What tips do you have on the journey of pivoting? Like, if you were to think back about your process in pivoting, it's a common thing that a lot of startups go through.
Yeah. Well, I think it varies for consumer and enterprise. For consumer, it's like clear what the traction looked like. Enterprise, you can trick yourself into thinking that you can build a business by like getting into that cycle where you're just being like, I'm convinced because I've created some opportunities in my pipeline, and then I'm convinced because I closed a couple customers, and then I'm convinced because of the next thing. And you should always be stress testing that, being like, do we really have something that's going to scale? And I know people are like, I'm going to build a platform, infrastructure, this, that. That's fine. I'm a big fan of building becoming a monopolist in a small market with a lot of adjacencies. So pick something that is very clear, and it's like, oh, I can drive a wedge right through that thing. I can become the monopolist, and then there's a lot of things that I can do next to it. Not the monopolist, but the leading vendor, right? Like tactically, you need to think about that. And so, number one. Number two, you're going to talk to all your peers. You're going to have a peer group. You're going to have a Slack channel. You guys are going to have dinner. You're going to talk to them. Oh, what are your numbers like? What are my numbers like? This, that, the other. That's all fine and good. But remember, like, no two businesses are the same. So just because their go-to-market motion looks like one thing doesn't mean that yours should look the same. And it's like, oh, well, they went, whatever, 5, 10, 50, so I should too. It's like, well, maybe not. They've been doing 10K deals. You're trying to do 250K deals. I mean, it's totally different. And it's like, and then people are like, oh, I was just talking to a founder 2 days ago. Oh, I think we should go with a vertical strategy. I'm like, what does that even mean to you? He's like, well, we closed one retailer, so we should close another. I'm like, well, that's true anyway, but that has nothing to do with having a vertical strategy. And why should you have because I was talking to some CRO at another company, and he's got one. I'm like, well, these are like the worst, reasons I could possibly think of. So like, let's talk about your business and like, what are the industries and what are the things you need to do? And so I understand that when you don't have all the answers, you're grappling. And so you hear something, you're like, that's the answer. And then you hear another one, you're like, that's the answer. And it's like, no, those probably are not the answers. Those are the answers for those people. So you should always be listening and like trying to take the input, but understand that like, I understand you have imperfect information. I got it. But guess what? Everyone always has imperfect information, number one. Number two, you have more perfect information about your business than anyone else does, for sure. So it's great to listen to all the inputs, but at the end of the day, like, you should be like, I think this is the strategy. And you need to have a strategy and a thesis, and then prove it or disprove it, right? Don't waffle. You need to have conviction. And then you need to say, hey, we're going to do this for 6 months, and if this is not working, we're going to sit down and say why, and then we're going to look at it. But you can't, like, waffle every time, like, the wind changes, and it's like, oh, I just read a blog post. Shit, we're actually going to go to a go-to-market PLG motion. And you're like, what are you talking about? Like, the person wrote a blog post because they can't get a job, So, yeah.
No, I think it's a really good point around like seeking disvalidation of some of your ideas and theses. Like the worst thing I see is when early stage founders are just like super high conviction in some random idea which they started with instead of like iterating and moving to the next one. A final question for you. What kind of tip would you give to founders who are just starting to fundraise for the first time? How would you suggest that they think about investors? And
one of the common mistakes, I talk to founders all the time about fundraising. We help with strategic fundraising conversations all the time, literally every day. And like one of the big mistakes that people who have not seen the movie start with are like, oh, what are the firms I should talk to? Okay, so what you have to realize is that investors are not firms. They're random collections of people who got together for the purpose of collecting other money from other people to disperse it to you. Okay, so you had 4 different venture capitalists up here. They're all different. And some of them have, specific enterprise or consumer, or I do defense, or I do biotech, or I do whatever. I do at this stage, I do at this thing. So you need to identify the people who you think are going to, first of all, understand what you're talking about, like what the story is and why it could be big, and B, that are relatable, like that you're like, okay, this is someone that I think that if I go and I talk to them, we can have a good conversation and I can understand, explain to them what I'm trying to do and why I'm trying to do that. And then obviously that like, if I'm fortunate enough to get a term sheet from them and they join my board, that they're going to be able to provide value add. And one of the biggest things I see is like, I understand there's a lot of it. I understand if you go to ChatGPT and say, give me the best enterprise, it's going to give you some matrix of like 500. I got it. Okay. However, you still have a vision and an idea of what you're trying to do and where you're trying to go. There's probably 3 or 5 companies that you're like, ooh, I like what they're doing. I'd like to emulate what they're doing. They're 3 or 5 years ahead of me. Look at who's on their board and who's providing value. Look at who's actually writing things that seem to make sense. Talk to your friends. Like, who do they like and who do they not like? The worst thing you could do is get like a bunch of brand names on your board where it's people who like don't pay attention, are overboarded, don't have enough subject matter expertise in what you're doing, or like are doing too much pattern matching, or even worse than that, if 2 of them don't like each other, they're going to get fights in your board meeting that have nothing to do with you. Not that that happened to me, but maybe it did. Who knows? And so, like, just being really thoughtful. I think Christina said it the best. It was the last thing I heard before I had to go backstage and put on the Michael Jackson microphone, which was, it's harder, it's true. It is harder to divorce your investors than it is your spouse, okay? It is impossible. Partner swapping inside a firm and changing out the firm are like anathema. You are over. Show's over. Company's over. It's never going to happen. So, like, these are the most important decisions you can make. And remember, whatever round you're doing, your pre-seed, your seed, even your Series A or whatever, there's going to be hopefully 3 more rounds. So whatever 3% or 5% increase in term sheet valuation you're getting from the investor that you don't like as opposed to the one you're going to like, that's going to impact you for 2% ownership, that thing also is going to get diluted 4 times. And it's going to end up being 30 basis points at the end of the day. And what you're trying to do is get a very small piece of a very large pie. When we went public, I owned, a lot less than I did when we started the company when there was 2 of us. But guess what? It was worth a lot more than 0, which is what it was when we started the company. So that's the goal of what you're trying to do. And you want to make sure that, like, for that 30 basis point delta, you got someone that you actually wanted to show up on your board and help you and was like the right fit for your company, not a name brand of someone else that didn't really have that impact. So,
All right.
are there no questions from the audience? You didn't even look at your phone.
There are some questions.
He gave him a bogus email, so the questions are going somewhere else. You just raise your hand.
How do you
I can't see
hire
anyway.
an A team of co-founders before the funding? How do you think about recruiting and picking co-founders?
Picking co-founders. Well, Todd and I dated, and then we actually went to dinner with his wife and my fiance and had our significant others kind of interview. I didn't realize that was what was happening. I was like, oh, sure, I'll go to dinner with him. Hey, baby, we should go to dinner. Oh, yeah, great, sounds good. We show up at dinner, and I'm like, oh, shit, actually, I understand what's happening now. So I was trying to, like, tell her under the table, but she's a doctor, and she's like, oh, what nice people. I'm like, no. Evaluate whether or not I should be working with this guy. That's what we're supposed to be doing here. We actually also had, like, he gave me a reference list of people, of executives from Salesforce and before, who he was like, you can call these people. I looked at the list. I was like, you can pretty much call those people about me too. So that was good. So there's a bunch of things in common. One thing that worked out really well was we were not best friends. And I think that's still true today, 15 years later. We're great business partners. It's been an amazing partnership. We get along great, but, like, we're not best friends. We don't spend time together on the weekend. His kids are a little bit older. They do different things than my kids. And that actually has worked out really well because it's not emotional. And in fact, I started another company in 2017, a neurotherapeutics company that Genentech Roche just bought with 2 other people, one of whom was, like, one of my best friends. And I had to sit him down, and he was also an entrepreneur. He was also a professor. And I said, hey, I think this could actually be a big problem. We need to talk about this ahead of time because of all the train wreck stories and because of my experience at Okta. Like, this could get really hard. And he's like, cool. So we actually had that discussion and worked out okay. But I think I was more mature. I think when I was younger, if Todd and I were best friends, it would have been way more emotional. And it's super hard as it is, as you all know. But, like, you want to stack the odds as much as you can in your favor. So at least being able to have unemotional, objective disagreements, I think is super, and then not, like, drag it into friendship is a super valuable thing. So.
All right. Well,
anything else? That's it? Come on.
All right. There's one more question. That's
there
good.
You go. All right. Thanks.
I'll give you a rapid fire on this one because we're over time.
Okay.
You guys were experienced leaders before starting at Okta, experience at Salesforce and whatnot. How would you think about fundraising without that for the younger founders out here?
I think the biggest thing is, like, storytelling. In fact, when we went to raise our seed round, we were rejected by, like, 20 firms. Okay? They're all like, yeah, nope. Yeah, oh, it's a great idea. No, we won't invest. By the way, there's 1,000 ways to say no, and they all mean the same thing, by the way. No, right? So it's like, oh, my partners are out of town. Oh, the other thing. Oh, well, we're right in the middle of fundraising. Oh, it doesn't matter. You got the picture. It's all no. Okay, so we got like 25 of those, and we were driving down to Silicon Valley again, and we were right by the airport, and I remember Todd looking at me and being like, we might never fucking raise money for this company. And I was like, that is the wrong attitude. I was like, so what? And we were on our way to see Mark and Ben. And I was like, okay, so what is the problem? What do you think the problem is? He's like, I don't know. And we're getting there. And I was like, you know what? Our deck sucks. Like, you're not an artist. I'm not an artist. The thing looks terrible. It looks like we pulled out a bunch of, like, Microsoft icon things, which is exactly what we did. And like, he's like, okay, well, what do you suggest? I was like, let's just like tell the story. And so we walked in, and they didn't have a projector anyway, conveniently, because it was like early days and they barely had a table. And they're like, so you guys want to throw us a deck? And I was like, no. And they're like, oh, well, that's great because we don't have a projector. And I was like, well, perfect. So we're going to tell you a story. And we told them the story. And it was a true story. It was like, what we'd seen and our experience in enterprise software and how we'd seen this revolution starting to happen at Salesforce. And we believed that this was going to be much bigger and all these other things. And they're like, yeah, okay, this sounds interesting. And we walked out and Todd was like, oh my God. And I was like, yeah, that was unbelievable. He's like, we should never use a deck. I was like, that is the wrong answer, okay? Do not extrapolate that line out. However, it is very true. Like, the takeaway is right. Like, the story matters way more than the slides, okay? I talk to founders all the time. I'm always trying to help them out. And, like, what I care about now in my old age is about the entrepreneur. Like, why you're doing what you're doing and why you give a shit. And you're all very smart, very talented. Why are you going to spend the next 10 years of your life doing this? And you can tell really quickly. And when we were busy at Okta and we were public, and then there was a pandemic, and then I started a biotech company, and it was like I'd be on an airplane somewhere between Germany and Australia, and one of my friends would be like, hey, you should write a seed check into this company. And I'd be like, I don't even have time to look at it. Okay, fine. And then I stopped doing that because I really want to invest in the entrepreneur. And so I want to meet the entrepreneur. And the story they'll tell me, it's like businesses are not written on a spreadsheet. It doesn't matter what you extrapolate out your revenues to be in year 5 when you have 0 revenue. It's like, well, it could be 200 million, could be $1 billion, could be 0. Like, you have no idea. It doesn't really matter. And so I started looking at these pitch decks, and I'd be like, they have no idea. And it's okay. I had no idea either. I did it also. But like, the story of, what you're doing and why you're doing it and why you care and why you're going to spend your time doing this is like, obviously you're doing it in a big market. Obviously 1,000 things could go wrong. Obviously 1,000 things could go right. But like, what the conviction is that you have and what you're trying to do, like, that's the thing. And that's the thing in entrepreneurship and innovation anyway, right? The things that are changed at such dramatic levels are changed by the people who have the conviction and hear it 25 times say no, or 100 times, no, stupid, no, stupid. Okay, I'm not saying you should make that total catnip with like blinders on, but kind of, right? Because if you believe in what you're doing, you will find someone else who believes. If not, like, okay, maybe you need a new idea. I got that. But I'm just saying, like, that is the thing that matters. And so don't worry if you get told no 1 million times. It's happened to all of us. No one will talk about it, but I'm here to tell you it's happened to everyone. And that's just part of the program. And a lot of times these decisions will be made for reasons that have nothing to do with you. It'll be just a bad day at the venture capital firm because a company just went bankrupt over the weekend, so they all walk in a bad mood. And your pitch might be the perfect pitch. And they're like, no! And you're like, fuck, dude, I thought this was teed up. And it's like, it was, right until like the senior partner wrapped his Maserati around a telephone pole on Saturday morning with a woman in the car who wasn't his wife, okay? And like, that has nothing to do with you, and that may or may not be a true story, by the way. And that has nothing to do with you, and it will impact your ability to raise money in the partner meeting on Monday morning, okay? So just understand that like, everyone's human, and there's a lot going on, but I wish you all the best of luck. If there's anything I can do to help you, please don't hesitate to let me know. All right?
All right.
Thank you all very much. Nice job, dude.
Thank you.